Directors webinar. We're focused on data-driven instructional coaching model today, and we'll get into that in about 10 minutes. But before we go with that, have a little bit of an intro. So from a high-level point of view, we're going to talk briefly about the Research Minute and a question of the month, and then we'll jump into the main presentation with instructional coaching. The Research Minute is actually an article that Jennifer found that we'll talk briefly a minute about here. It's the Elementary Secondary School Emergency Resource Fund is the topic of that, so we'll look at that. And then after that, we'll talk briefly about question of the month. And I put that here in the beginning just to kind of let the question percolate, and then we'll return to it here in a few minutes. But the question is, have you used AI to help with your SPDIG? And so we'll return to that, and I hope people can chime in via chat. And always you're welcome to unmute your microphones and chime in that way. But before we return to that question of the month, the article is called No Silver School Spending Bullets. It's 5 lessons from the $190 billion ESSER investment to help drive continued learning recovery. Of course, the ESSER was the emergency funding that came through relative to the COVID pandemic. It's by Marguerite Rosa and Maggie Chico, and I'll go ahead and apologize to our presenters when I introduce them. I may botch their names as well, but I'll do my best as I can. So real quick, a background from the article. The Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, like I said, was $190 billion investment designed to help support learning recovery. But the results varied largely across districts and states, some with strong gains and others, struggled. And the crux of this article is that, funding alone doesn't necessarily guarantee outcomes. And so now that we're in this phase where the ESSER has come to an end and there's no major federal funding to replace that on the horizon, it's kind of, this article is looking at what lessons can we take from it and ensure smarter or more effective spending moving forward. And according to this article, the research points to 2 key strategies that help districts make the most of their funds. So of course, we're talking about maximizing return on investment to these dollars. So again, according to Rosa and Chico, how can schools drive learning gains? So how can systems continue to drive learning gains as this funding ends? According to this article, they've analyzed data and engaging with leaders to understand how systems might get more return on the investment of dollars they have. The findings point to 5 key lessons. I'll let you all think about whether you can guess one or more of the lessons learned. So those 5 lessons. Number 1, state leadership appears to matter. So some states such as Mississippi, North Carolina, Ohio, and Tennessee saw stronger gains for their dollars spent. And again, according to these authors and the research that they've pulled in for this article, after ruling out factors such as how funds were spent, spending prescriptions, staffing levels, lengths of courses, those sorts of things, their hypothesis is that leaders in the states that perform better were simply more effective at steering districts to focus on student learning. For example, education commissioners in North Carolina, Mississippi, and Tennessee emphasized reading and math over other agendas, and were clear about what constituted success and measuring progress along the way. And that's in contrast to states where districts were able to set their own priorities. And so there were varying priorities across the state. So number one, state leadership matters. Number two, inequities are hardwired into many large districts and may have stalled progress in higher poverty schools. So some of the neediest schools ended up being shortchanged, and this was due to large districts, higher poverty districts getting double or more funds per pupil than wealthier districts. But then within those districts, the wealthier schools were disproportionately boosted through that funding. And so the neediest schools continued to be shortchanged under that framework. So leaders wanting to ensure that funds help their highest need schools may need to reconsider reliance on these ingrained practices, such as uniform salary schedules. They also highlight there's a need to explore alternative compensation models, targeting pay for teaching in higher poverty schools, for example, is a strategy that's worked elsewhere. I believe it was California is the example that they note in the article. And once I'm done here, I will put the link to the article in the chat so everybody can have access to that. Number three, districts could get more value from procurement contracts. 20–30% of the funds went to purchasing services through contracts. A lot of times those contracts were inefficient. Issues included lack of buyer information, vendor selection based on who you know, and limited monitoring of contract effectiveness after the services were procured. So these authors say, in short, these contracts deserve more attention than they're getting. And that by writing a smart contract with clear expectations, then monitoring data on implementation and results can help ensure that these dollars make gains on students' outcomes. Number four, special education is not a cost-effective remedy for weak reading instruction. This is really talking to the multi-tiered systems of support model, right? And these authors note that throughout this ESS provision, there was actually an increase in students with special needs being identified for special education services. And I think those of us who are familiar with the multi-tiered system of support know the impacts of not having a solid tier one system in place and being certain that the research-based practices are being implemented with fidelity. And therefore, if that's not in place, the higher tiers becoming more bloated, if you will, for lack of a better term. So leaders seeing outside growth in special education identification rates might consider focusing their limited dollars instead on improving tier one reading instruction to make sure that everybody is getting quality teaching and quality learning environments. And then finally, number five, in many districts, budgeting isn't oriented toward value for students. Student outcomes are rarely considered in budgeting. These authors report that through the ESSER, only 25% of meetings mentioned student impact. 16% only weighed different options to maximizing student outcomes. Again, this is relative to budgeting. And only 13% of the meetings reviewed past investments before renewing them. Some of the faults with this budgeting is blamed on rigid budget cycles, limiting flexibility, with only 14% of funds being spent in the first year of ESSER due to bureaucratic processes, and district approved budgets being approved before test scores were available, limiting real-time adjustments from year to year. So solutions that are in this article, and again, I'll put the link in the chat here shortly. Solutions for smarter budgeting are tying spending decisions to student outcomes, and of course, updated student scores, providing financial trading to district leaders to improve decision making. So interesting article, all focused on how to maximize return on investment for money that is being spent by states to improve student outcomes. So now I'd like to return to the question of the month. Have you used AI to help with your SPDIG? I know the cat is out of the bag in a lot of ways with AI, and at our last SPDIG national meeting in last October, we had a speaker talk a little bit about how AI is being used in education. So I open this question up to the floor. Please feel free to come off of mute and vocally state your answers, or put it in the chat.
Hi, John. Stacy from New York. At the OSEP Leadership Conference, I think it was in August, in DC, there was a session on AI that was attended by many. And in that session, one of the things that they talked about is how you can use AI to increase efficiency of some of our most mundane tasks. So some individuals use it to write emails and or letters to stakeholders. Some individuals have used it to write portions of grants. They've found it very helpful for that. In my work, I use it a lot to write contracts for speakers for our conference that I host once a year. So, you can put a prompt into ChatGPT to generate a contract, and then you can sort of like modify that contract for the speakers that you're bringing in. So it's been very helpful for me in that instance. We've used it to generate themes for our conference. So yeah, those are just some of the examples how I've used it in our work.
That's great, Stacy. I really appreciate your coming off mute and filling the airwaves with not just my voice, and coming up with real ways that it's being used. Certainly I use it in a lot of those ways as well. I also find it helpful to bounce ideas off of for ways of thinking about grant proposals, for example, as well. Thank you for that. Other ideas of how you might use it? I see some input in the chat as well. Using it to create coaching scenarios for coaching and training. Used to evaluate transcripts of focus groups and identify themes. Helping educators unpack standards. We've also used it for training blast. Beth Ficklin says, I'm just an evaluator, which I don't think comes across the right way. I think you mean I'm an evaluator, so I don't necessarily focus on something. I ran into a teacher who was using it to generate grade level short stories for students where the student gave prompts of high interest and students loved the stories. Thank you, Beth. So I think there's lots of room to use AI as we move forward to help with SPDIGs. I certainly encourage people to think about and share ways that it's helping you in the future. So as a reminder, tomorrow is Fidelity Friday. We've got Rebecca Zametta Edmonds joining us, and she will be presenting on leveraging fidelity to simplify and sustain intensive interventions. So that's tomorrow at 12 Eastern. For those of you who can make it, I look forward to seeing you there. And here we go. Today's presentation, the data-driven instructional coaching model. We've got Todd Glover, Linda Reddy, Gina Marzariello from Rutgers, and Alexander Kurtz from Arizona State University. So with that, I will go ahead and give the microphone over to you all and let you share your screens as well. Welcome.
Great, thank you. Let me just get my screen up here. All right, well, thanks for having us today. So this presentation is going to walk you through the data-driven instructional coaching model, or DDICM. It's a coaching framework for supporting classroom teachers and interventionists serving the needs of K-3 students with or at risk of reading disabilities. The DDICM has been integrated into New Jersey's SPDIG. It's a partnership between Rutgers University and the NJDOE. That's really focused on building statewide capacity for multi-tiered system of supports for early reading. But for today, we're going to be discussing its implementation and outcomes as part of an OSEP-funded model demonstration project with a focus on Tier 2 and 3 intervention. So John, you already introduced us, but I'll just introduce myself again. I'm Gina Mazzarello. You did a pretty good job there with my last name. I'm the project manager. I'm joined today by Drs. Todd Glover and Linda Reddy of Rutgers and Alexander Kurtz of Arizona State. You are going to be hearing from each of us at different points today, okay? So we thought we'd start with a little fun before diving into today's discussion. So I'm going to turn this over to Linda, who's going to break the ice with a quick question.
Great to see everybody. So we thought for fun, we'd start off with people using the chat and they could indicate what their first rock or pop or whatever concert you attended in your life. Don't be shy. Oh, wow. Well, this is a really impressive level of variability here, Gina, today in terms of concerts, some of which I recognize, some of it I don't, but pretty impressive. And yeah. Was somebody trying to say something? Okay, very good. So we have the we have Elvis Presley. That's really neat. That's really neat. Tina Turner, Kiss, YouTube. I'm just doing the full range. I think Jelly is Jelly Roll, Stacy, right? Hi, Stacy, as well. We've met Moody Blues. Yes, well, that's a good one. The Jackson 5, again, really historical stuff here. Oh my goodness. And Faith No More, Alan. Very good. All right, very good. All looks really good, and a lot of them I've actually done as well. You got Janet Jackson and all of that, and Cher. So wonderful. Thank you guys so much. And go ahead, Gina, for the next slide.
Courtney, I see you. I went to YouTube, my first concert as well.
Awesome.
So,
awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, concerts are a good outlet for relieving stress, especially for those of us involved in systems work, right? All right. So let's talk a little bit first about the purpose of the DDICM now. So we know from the literature the adverse effects caused by early reading difficulties and the need for data-driven instruction to address those reading difficulties and ameliorate long-term adverse outcomes. So enter the DDICM. It's an empirically supported coaching framework to develop interventionist skills and competencies in data-driven instruction. So we thought to highlight that impact, we'd hear first from some voices of those working directly with the DDICM. So these are just some testimonies from educators who've been implementing this work. One coach noted that intervention and progress monitoring have become business as usual across their district. Another emphasized how the model promotes collaboration and data-driven goal setting. Another has expressed appreciation for the consistency that the DDICM is bringing to instructional practices. So I think for all of us here that are interested in systems work, we can appreciate the sentiment that's being shared about how the DDICM is being moved into routine practice that's being consistently applied. So let's look at our agenda now for today's presentation. So we'll be giving an orientation to the DDICM theory of change and the components of the coaching framework. That'll be followed by our first engagement activity. Then we'll discuss the participants of the DDICM and how we are supporting systems level growth. We'll talk about training on the DDICM, starting first with the coaching protocols that are used. That will be followed by our second engagement activity. And then we'll discuss coaching protocols and integration with ReadyCoach, which is an online coaching platform. And then that will be followed by our final engagement activity. Then we will close out today's presentation discussing outcomes of the DDICM, and then we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A at the end. So I just wanted to talk quickly about Padlet. We'll be using that during the engagement and reflection activities. So I don't know if you have the PDF, but you could grab it from the embedded link there, or scan the QR code and you can access it right from your phone. I'm also going to drop a link to it in the chat. So just give me just a second to grab that and drop it in the chat. Okay. So we are going to use this throughout, but if you have any questions as we go along today, please just enter them in the last box that's highlighted here. This is exactly what you'll see when you access the Padlet. We're going to do our best to answer those questions during the Q&A at the end of today's presentation. Just something to note that you'll be asked to enter your name when leaving your first comment. If you don't leave your name, it'll give you an alias like Anonymous Raccoon or something. All right, but then after you enter your name for the first time, your name's going to appear with all the other comments that you enter after that. Okay, so I'm now going to turn it over to Alex, who's going to discuss DDICM's theory of change.
All right, thanks, Gina. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about theory, although I'm going to keep it brief. The theory of change that you see here on the screen is something that Todd, Linda, others, and I have worked on for over 10 years. So there's a lot of research to cover and that went into this. In terms of the layout of the theory of change, all the way on the left, you see the key participants in the model, which are coaches, interventionists, students, of course, and administrators. When we say interventionists, most of the time that refers to teachers, but that's not always the case. In some districts we work, we have different types of personnel that are specifically responsible for the implementation of reading interventions or behavioral interventions, etc. The main ingredients of the intervention, if you will, are listed under the DDICM column. And you can see there are key elements that we have put on the map, so to speak. But there's a box around it, which means that we have not experimentally isolated those various active ingredients. We're currently viewing this as a package type of intervention. And you can see there is a dosage referred to regarding certain elements like training on the coaching protocols, training on the technology. Technology is a piece of the DDICM. There's leadership consultation, which deals with systemic changes of implementing a model like the DDICM. And of course, there is job-embedded coaching. Then we have 3 areas of outcomes. And as with most theories of change, they're kind of ordered in sort of a locus of control spectrum, right? We have the greatest amount of control on the proximal outcomes, and then it fades out with additional variables coming in on the intermediate and the distal side. Overall, we're looking for success of our students in the general curriculum under Tier 1, and we're looking at outcomes that are related to coaches, interventionists, administrators, and of course, students. Now, we are an indirect service model, so we want to improve student outcomes by virtue of driving improvement in teachers' knowledge and skills, which is why you're going to see all of the coaching outcomes at the proximal level. And if you look at the elements, it might be a little bit hard to see the main aspect of the proximal outcomes deals with changes around the modeling, the practice, and the feedback provided by our coaches, focused on identifying the needs of students and the resources needed to address them, establishing groups of students based on that need, setting the appropriate goals, and finding the interventions that are aligned to those needs identified, and then subsequently keeping track of goal progress, fidelity of intervention of the intervention, and of course, collecting data through the coaching technology. And we'll talk about that later on as well. And then when we move to the intermediate outcomes, you now see administrators and interventionists come into play. Ultimately, we believe that if you implement those proximal outcomes, you see changes in fidelity on the implementation intervention, as well as systems level changes on driving intervention decisions. And then lastly, if that all happens, we hope to see attainment of student grade level benchmarks, and we'll show you some of those outcomes here today as well. And if you have any subsequent questions around, well, what is this research that you have done on the DDICM? We've been part of numerous studies, including experimental studies, even mentioned in the Craft et al. Piece, which is now almost 7 years old. It was a meta-analysis of different coaching models. So the DDICM is featured in those. And a lot of the work that Linda, Todd, and I have done has focused around the effective actions that coaches have taken. And by that, we mean when we talk about actions that effective coaches have taken, we mean effective in terms of driving changes at the teacher level and the student level. And one key piece before I move on is the DDICM considers the way we provide professional development by virtue of coaching, always with the through line of student outcomes. And if you contrast it with other coaching models, these other coaching models often focus on the types of conversations that coaches and teachers have in order to produce changes in their knowledge and skills. While we do that as well, all of those targets that we have for teacher professional development are in relationship to identified student needs. So we provide the professional development for the teachers in the context of the needs identified in their students. So instead of a dual input, we sort of have this trifecta of inputs. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it there and give it back to Gina.
All right, thanks, Alex. Okay. So Alex touched on some of this, but we're going to just take another look at the 3 primary components of the DDICM, or look at those 3 components that are collectively contributing to the advancement of teacher practices and positive student outcomes. So with the DDICM, there's a focus on the learning environment rather than static traits of teachers or students. And it's the learning environment that's sort of regarded as being primarily responsible for student performance. So coaches are working with teachers to adjust practices to meet the needs of students, and coaches are really focusing on using student data to create a learning environment that's responsive to students. Then there are standardized coaching protocols that are used to facilitate the coaching sessions. Alex talked about the modeling, the practice, and the feedback that's being provided by coaches. We are going to review those protocols more in depth in a moment. And then the DDICM is making use of this formalized data-driven implementation framework. So coaches are supporting teachers in systematically analyzing universal screening and diagnostic data to identify student-specific reading skill needs. They're developing intervention plans, setting goals, implementing interventions to achieve those goals, and evaluating goal progress to inform additional needs. Now, these components are operationalized through 2 primary processes: the use of implementation protocols, which we'll talk about, and an online platform, ReadyCoach, which we'll also discuss. And these are coming together to facilitate support for students, again, with or at risk of reading disabilities, receiving Tier 2 and 3 intervention. All right, so that was an orientation to the DDICM. So we're going to stop now for our first engagement activity. Again, you're going to be using Padlet for this activity, so just make sure you access it. And then once asked, you're going to be entering your responses into the first box that you see highlighted here. I am going to turn this over to Linda, who's going to explain the activity and facilitate the discussion, but I'll show Padlet here so we can start to see some responses coming through.
That's great. Thanks, Gina. Um, so we want you to think through your coaching process. And Gina, just for you to know, the print's a little small for me.
Okay, let me see if I can.
If we can go back to it, I don't have a large screen.
How's
That's
this?
fine.
Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay.
So at first, so thinking about the work that you're doing in your respective projects and states, how is coaching defined in the work that you're doing currently? And we'd like you to think about and to put into the Padlet, who are your coaches? Are they school-based coaches? Are they external coaches? Are they teachers that have been promoted based on your project, who have been deemed to be very effective as coaches? A variety of coaches that could be used. Are they interventionists? Are they school psychologists? And finally, if you wouldn't mind just putting a few notes on who they are coaching, who are the coachees that are in your project. Thank you.
Linda and Gina, I see a comment in the chat saying that the QR code might be deactivated. So I went ahead
Oh.
and I've re-entered the link in the chat so people can access it through that link. And that
Oh,
seems to
I'm
work.
sorry.
for
Thanks,
me.
John.
Sorry
Yeah,
about
Gina,
that.
I actually thought it was my phone. And yes, he's absolutely correct. So if people could click on the link,
I'm
they
sorry
could-
about that.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
worries. It works. But okay, great. And all righty, Gina, I'm trying to get into the
Okay.
the
Well, I guess
screen
if-
right now, and not a problem. I see one person has entered. It's Courtney. Here we
Oh,
go.
we have more coming in. Okay.
Yes. We have to give them a few minutes. We have coaches here attending this meeting too, which is great. Hmm. So Gina, I'm looking at the responses. There are some acronyms there, so we're probably going to have our colleagues let us know what some of them are. I don't recognize HLP. I could, as an acronym, they're coaching HLP.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that either.
Yeah, that's great.
Or
I mean,
if
I
anyone
think
wants to take themselves off mute and explain, that's fine too.
that would be great. Hmm.
I got put in the chat by Courtney. HLP stands for high leverage practices.
Oh, high level. All right. So I guess this is going to be primarily the model. So to answer the first question, how is the coaching defined in your initiative? We have quite a bit of variability over this, Gina, in terms of how it's being defined in the tiered system and who are the coaches.
Yeah. It's interesting to see.
District coordinators. One of the things that's interesting is I'm going to make the guess that based on the very brief descriptions, is that the coaches that are in the various projects across these great states, it's such a great variety here, are folks that are indigenous to the school. So they're school-based coaches or someone who's been trained to be a coach within the district, I'm assuming, because that's not fully clear. Some are former teachers, some are coordinators, and some are retired but are full-time teachers, a variety of folks. as well. That's very helpful. And who are they coaching? They're coaching a load of folks, lots of teams, lots of educators. And oh, by the way, I just want to point out, Stacy inputted that her coaches are school psychologists, district administrators, and educators. So a real variety of folks that are doing system coaching in that project as well. And if anybody wants to comment and go off mute, please do if they want to add. All right. Well, terrific.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as we said earlier, we're really sharing about the DDICM as part of this implementation and an OSEP or a model demonstration project. So there could be some difference there in terms of the participants enrolled in this than what you might see in some of these state SPDIGs that some people were speaking to there. So let's talk a little bit about the participants involved in the DDICM as part of this model demonstration grant. So across 3 demographically distinct cohorts, we have 5 districts and 9 schools. All of these districts had participated in a previous cohort as part of our SPDIG focused on MTSS for early reading. They were at varying levels of implementation with that work, but all of them had spent the majority of that time shoring up their tier 1. And then common among them was really a need to operationalize their tier 2 and 3 intervention and progress monitoring, which made them well positioned to benefit from the DDICM, which is focused on tier 2 and tier 3 intervention. So across these sites, we have 3 unique educator functions, instructional coaches, classroom teachers, and interventionists. In this context, we're defining instructional coaches as those people who are serving in a full-time district or school-based coaching capacity. In the DDICM, coaches are working with classroom teachers and interventionists. Classroom teachers in this context are primarily those personnel who are providing universal core instruction to all students. And then distinctive to classroom teachers are interventionists. And there really are those people who are delivering supplemental instruction to students identified as at risk of or with a reading disability. So we talked about coaches, teachers, and interventionists as participants, but as noted when Alex talked about the DDICM's theory of change, administrators are key participants, and consultation with leadership teams is a key ingredient for ensuring these critical organizational structures and processes are in place to implement the DDICM successfully. So part of the consultative process with leadership teams is assessing systems level capacity and implementation and providing that ongoing support for systems level growth. So we're going to talk about 2 measures that we use, starting with the District Capacity Assessment, or DCA. That might be an instrument that some of you are familiar with. You might be using it in your own SPDIG. If you're not familiar with it, it assesses the capacity of a district to facilitate implementation of an innovation, in this case, the DDICM, by assessing things like systems, activities, and resources, those things that are just really necessary for successful implementation for schools to adopt and sustain something. So we administer the DCA once per year at the beginning of each school year for the duration of the grant. To make the DCA a strong measure of capacity to implement not just any innovation, because as it's written, it's general, but we were looking at it as a measure to implement the DDICM. We contextualize some of the items to specify alignment. And then we meet with leadership teams to facilitate the DCA. We work with them to validate findings and support consensus building. At baseline that was collected at the beginning of the 21-22 school year, we found that on average, 40% of practices were scored as fully in place. We're then consulting with the local leadership teams. We're identifying areas of strength, areas of need, developing an action plan to increase capacity. And then as of the beginning of this 24-25 school year, we saw an increase in now an average of 68% of practices are scored as fully in place. We're also obtaining systems level data from the district implementation map. This is a tool that has been developed by Rutgers, used to assess districts' progress in implementing DDICM aligned practices. So similarly to the DCA, the map is completed at the beginning of each school year with the district leadership teams, with our team working with them to just check reliability of the data. Just a little technical note here, responses on the implementation map are recorded into numerical values. There's some to calculate a total score that would reflect the degree to which districts are implementing DDICM practices. So for example, districts would get a score of 0, 1, or 2 if certain practices were not yet partially or fully implemented. And then overall, compared to a hypothetical district that implemented all of the DDICM practices, we found that the average implementation score at baseline was 57%. And then again, we're engaging with the leadership teams to consult with them to identify those areas in need of improvement, an action plan around those areas. And then as of the beginning of this school year, an average of 83% of practices were fully implemented. So we're happy to see that capacity and implementation are improving and growing. So key to implementing the DDICM through this systems change process is ensuring that implementers have the competencies, the confidence to implement the model with fidelity. As Alex discussed earlier, training on the DDICM is a key ingredient of its theory of change. So we're just going to look at how we're preparing key stakeholders in 2 main areas, on the coaching protocols and Ready Coach. So training begins in the fall of the district's first year of implementation, and it culminates in the winter of that same year. Now, that's really the time period for us to provide intensive in-person training, but maintenance training is provided throughout. So that might be through virtual consultation. It could be through on-site visits if needed. And we've also developed asynchronous training modules on both of these to sustain and support ongoing capacity building. Now you'll notice that district and building leaders are listed here as participants. Our objective here is really to create systems-wide change. So we ask that district and building leaders attend those trainings along with the key implementers, right? Coaches, interventionists, teachers, so that the focus is not merely on affecting like individual change, but through this leadership support. The coaching is really becoming tightly aligned and integrated with tier 2 and tier 3 systems, and it's really serving to build that collective capacity across all educators. So let's take a closer look now at the coaching protocols. So we have developed coaching protocols. There are common components or routines in every protocol that coaches are implementing. Those include important planning information, greetings and agenda setting, things like that to establish relationships, opportunities to review and reflect, and then coaching on the database decision-making focus of the protocol. And that's occurring through a gradual release framework of modeling, practice, and feedback. A closure that provides an opportunity to engage participants in reflection of learned practices, communicate next steps. And then there's a place for coaches to record any additional notes that would be pertinent for them to facilitate subsequent coaching. And we've also included a coaching reflection, and that's just a place for the coaches to engage in this optional coaching reflection process whereby they can set their own coaching goals. So across the protocols, there are these common steps and routines, but each protocol has a distinct database decision-making purpose and frequency of use in alignment with this data-informed cycle of instruction in an MTSS framework for early reading. Again, the goal is to really operationalize tier 2 and 3 intervention and progress monitoring. So over here in the left side column are those coaching protocols that are being used. So for example, there is a coaching protocol on analyzing universal screening to identify class-wide and student intervention needs and plan for follow-up diagnostics. And that would occur at primarily the fall and winter benchmarks. There's a protocol for then acting on those data and planning for class-wide or small group intervention. Again, at the fall and winter sort of administration or benchmarks of universal screening. There's a protocol for coaches to support intervention fidelity, where they're providing feedback and support on fidelity. That coaching protocol and that coaching is really occurring throughout the intervention cycle, really based on the available fidelity data. And then there's a protocol that's used to engage in decision-making to determining a student's response to intervention. Again, that's being used throughout the intervention cycle, but based on enough available data to make reliable decisions. So we have found that mapping this workout within the district's existing MTS framework has been really critical for success, so that the coaching framework is not just seen as like something else that we have to do, but it's being fully integrated. It's a valuable coaching system for operationalizing, again, these processes and practices. So we are going to look a little bit more closely at that when we discuss the integration of ReadyCoach and the coaching protocols. But now we would like to stop again, take another moment to hear from you. Again, I'm sorry that QR code isn't working. I just tested it. I don't know why it wasn't working, but
no problem.
Yeah, so we're going to
I just put the link, Gina, back into the chat for everyone just to click on it. That would be great.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Linda. Okay.
So what we'd like to do is have the group kind of think with us about their coaching project and implementation, and what surprised you that worked in your coaching integration. So what came to the top of mind, if you could put that in the into the link in the palette, that would be great. And also just to kind of reflect at a second level, what didn't work as you would have expected, or was a surprise that was a bit more of a challenge. Just take a minute or so for this.
If anything
Well,
is in the chat here.
I'm going to hit the I'm going to hit it here just to make sure mine's refreshing. I know it's late in the day and people are thinking of dinner at this time, depending on what time zone you're in.
It looks like people maybe are typing. We're just not seeing the responses yet. So thoughtful responses.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Here we go. Teacher shortages are impact. That was a surprise. That I guess that was a surprise to the second question for Patty. Teacher shortages impacted the coaching process, not as expected. Challenges and small systems, our coordinators and coaches really struggle to find time for the work. No, I think that would possibly be a barrier for all projects, that issue of time and getting it into routine. Gina, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yes, that's a challenge we have experienced as well.
Right. In New Jersey. Also turnover. So there's the issue of shortages and getting people into classrooms, keeping them, and sustaining our implementers, our team players, yes, and our projects for sure. I feel that's not unique. That's not unique to these projects. I think it's happening all over the country in the districts I've been speaking to. Here's another one now from New Mexico. Since we are building the systems and structure of SPDIG, we've been challenged by the skill levels. I'm sure the varied skill levels for sure of our former vendors, lack of understanding of data and providing student outcomes, and a whole bunch of other responses, Sheena, here.
Mm-hmm.
The time theme comes up again, of being able to get that into the daily routine, really challenging, and also challenges about doing virtual coaching. in really being able to do things at the deep level, not just the surface level for implementation, no doubt. These are all great responses, Gina.
Yeah.
Substitute teachers, all, yes, there's definitely cross-cutting themes from our responses from our colleagues. And I really appreciate Veronica's response, and I feel at least our project tries to address a school leader's understanding of what MTSS is and what it's not. That's a super important comment being made in terms of a barrier and to increase clarity and understanding with everyone in the building. That looks great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, thank
Linda,
you.
can I just add a comment to what I said about
Please
the
do. Please
leadership
do.
piece? Is that I work in Colorado, so I'm in Colorado and I'm in the San Luis Valley, which is isolated valley, 4 hours from Denver, 2 hours from any major metropolitan area. And I live and work
Wow.
here. My kid goes to school in the San Luis Valley. I taught in the San Luis Valley for 18 years before I went to work for the Department of Education in Colorado. And so we really have high turnover of leadership of superintendents, and that has been such a challenge in our SPDIG that we're actually going to really think really hard for the next SPDIG, fingers crossed next SPDIG, that we have like a new onboarding and a re-signing and a re-upping of commitment from new superintendents every time. Like I've had in two of my 4 districts I serve, there have been 3 superintendents in 4 years. So
Wow.
it's really the person who signs on for this great idea is gone 3 years ago. There's been 2 in between. So it's been really challenging.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Monica. Thank you very much. Okay, Gina.
Yeah, we've had some turnover as well in our sites, and it's been important to think about who is on that leadership team and part of those consultation meetings. So it's not all sort of being held by a single person, right? So who else outside of that superintendent, other district building based leaders who can advocate for the work, who can shepherd the work. But it is, time and people. Oh, those are always of limited supply in schools. And so it really requires us to think strategically and engage in that sort of ongoing consultation. So we can resonate with some of that. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to shift gears now. We're going to examine the integration of the DDICM coaching protocols and ReadyCoach to enhance instructional decision-making. So as mentioned earlier, the DDICM is designed for implementation within an MTSS framework of data-informed instruction. ReadyCoach is an online coaching platform and also really used as an intervention planning platform to automate and scaffold this process of tier 2 and tier 3 intervention. So it starts with universal screening. Districts upload their universal screening data to ReadyCoach. Just a little screenshot here of data that's been uploaded and automatically benchmarked to support the analysis of those data. Coaches then meet with interventionists. They're using a protocol and they're providing modeling, practice, and feedback to analyze data to determine both individual student needs and class-wide needs, and then planning for follow-up diagnostics to determine student-specific skill needs. So ReadyCoach also provides a class-wide need report to help with that. And then school personnel are administering diagnostics using the diagnostic inventories they selected for their district. Now, that's a local decision. They look at the tools that work best for them. These are some examples. We have districts using a resource that has been developed through our SPDIG. It's an inventory for identifying phonological and phonemic awareness needs, or they might be using other tools like a quick phonics screener. Regardless of what they're using, those school-based personnel are then administering the diagnostic, and then they're recording those results into ReadyCoach. So ReadyCoach has basically a form that accommodates the recording of those data. And then once diagnostic skill needs are entered, the next coaching session is held to group students and plan interventions. So again, Ready Coach is helping to automate and scaffold this process, but it's the coaches. They're using a coaching protocol. They're providing modeling, practice, and feedback. They're working with the coaches to look at some recommended groups that Ready Coach provides based on diagnostic skill information. They're refining those groups based on their local context and resources and needs. They're then planning groups based on, like I said, the local context, setting goals, and then establishing a schedule and assigning interventions. Ready Coach does have an intervention library with over 100 interventions that are recommended based on common skill needs of students in a group, but districts can certainly add their own interventions to the library, so it can be customized in that way. And then once planned, the intervention is implemented according to that plan. Data are being collected, and those data are being entered into Ready Coach. So this includes attendance, logging goal progress, monitoring fidelity through routine fidelity checks. Ready Coach also has a feature to record anecdotal notes, and that really enhances the sort of collaborative communication between coaches and interventionists as well. So let's talk a little bit about how coaches are supporting implementation fidelity. So for any intervention that's been assigned to an intervention group, Ready Coach provides an accompanying fidelity checklist to help monitor implementation of that instruction. So they're using that checklist, they're logging that fidelity, and then that fidelity is being charted on some graphs that we have in some charts in Ready Coach. And there are also statistics that are being generated based on implementation of those intervention steps. And then coaches are meeting with the interventionists. They're using a protocol. They're looking at the data that's in Ready Coach, and they're providing feedback on fidelity. And then they're providing coaching on any identified needs. So we'll discuss fidelity that's captured in Ready Coach a little bit more in depth when we look at outcomes of the DDICM a little bit later in the presentation. Then Ready Coach provides automated alerts based on logged goal progress and fidelity to determine a student's response to intervention. So these include an alert if the student has met the goal, if the student is experiencing insufficient progress and fidelity is high, if the student is making insufficient progress and fidelity is low. There's a coaching protocol that's used to facilitate the coaching based on these scenarios to provide modeling, practice, and feedback, where the coaches and the interventionists are coming together and they're analyzing available data. So that includes any attendance data that has been logged, looking at goal progress and fidelity, any anecdotal notes to get a better sense of the context and other information that might be helpful. And then looking at the interventions that have been assigned to determine skill alignment of the intervention with the student's skill needs. And all of that they're looking at to determine the student's response to intervention and then engage in any subsequent decision making. So that's a very high level, quick look at Ready Coach and how it's integrated with the coaching protocols. So again, we thought we'd stop here to hear from you about the technology that you are using to facilitate coaching in your SPDIG. I think Linda had to leave at this point, so I'll take over and facilitate this. So again, you're going to use the Padlet, and this time we're going to be in that third box here. So yeah, what technology are you using? So it might be something proprietary, third party. John talked about how we're using AI. So maybe there's generative AI tools that you're using to facilitate coaching. So we'd love to hear from you. I'll also look at the chat too to see if anything is coming in there. Oh, thank you, Karen, for the compliment on Ready Coach. All right, I see that a couple people are generating responses, so that's fine. We'll give some time here. Haven't selected yet. Okay, understood. Working on that. I think we'll probably get a bunch of responses populate all at once, so. All right. I don't want to rush the conversation. So I'll just give another few seconds here to see if anything else comes in. If anyone wants to unmute and just share, that's fine too. Oh, okay. Internally developed extensive coaching documents, checklists. Yep, Google. We use Google quite a bit in our SPDIG and our this model demo project as well. So that's good. Offers a lot of collaborative opportunities. Yep, Zoom, Google for virtual coaching. Absolutely. I think all of us can understand the importance of these platforms that allow us to meet with coaches and leadership teams and engage in all this work that makes sense for everyone's schedule. It allows us to meet sort of easier, not put a burden on people at all to come to a common site to do those things in person. So that's helpful. Is anyone using, I don't know, is that Swivels for short? SWIV for virtual observation. I can say we're not, but maybe other people are if they wanted to respond to that. An internal website, coaching logs, Google. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's interesting to hear. I think you can see some common tools that we're using across these projects. And boy, it's hard to keep up with how technology is changing. So if we were asked that question again next year, it'd be interesting to see the responses that we would get. So thank you for that. All right. So we're now going to shift our focus and spend the remaining time discussing outcomes of the DDICM. So thanks for hanging with us up to this point. We thought before we would get into the outcomes, give an opportunity to hear from educators in the field implementing this work. One coach appreciated the data analysis and the process for determining students' needs, including follow-up diagnostics. So we talked about how ReadyCoach and the coaching protocols are helping to facilitate that. An interventionist emphasized how the model centers student data in the data-driven decision-making process, not just vibes and feelings. We thought that was a really powerful testament. And interventionists have expressed appreciation for the grouping of students by skill needs. So it's always good to hear directly from those people doing the work. So let's take a closer look now at outcomes, starting with coaching fidelity. So to capture coaching fidelity, the coach records the implementation of coaching protocol steps. They choose from a list of options that reflect implementation of that step. They share that marked up copy with our project team. They also record at least 4 select sessions, and they're submitting those audio recordings to a HIPAA FERPA compliant Microsoft OneDrive folder. Our team then codes those audio sessions for fidelity. And one important piece of this is that it initiates a feedback loop with that coach, where we then meet with them to discuss those findings and provide feedback so that we can really support coaching fidelity. We also have randomly selected 25% of those sessions for inter-rater reliability scoring and have found that an average of inter-rater agreement of 87%. Looking at the data, we recently analyzed fidelity for each coaching protocol that was submitted by those local coaches during the 22-23 school year. We did find that on average, coaching fidelity is high, demonstrating strong adherence to those DDICM coaching practices. Some things that we noted, we weren't particularly surprised that the highest rate of fidelity was for the coaching protocol focused on providing feedback on fidelity of instruction, or this intervention fidelity protocol. Because our work with school-based coaches, we know that coaching with a focus on instruction is pretty familiar to them and an area of strength. So it was understandable that that would be high. We also noted, though, that the lowest rate of fidelity was for the protocol focused on analyzing student response to intervention. Now, those are typically more novel skills for coaches. The other thing is that they are dependent upon a strong progress monitoring process being put in place. That can take more time for school-based leadership to establish. That might explain why fidelity is lower in that area. And that just goes back to the importance of providing this ongoing consultation to leadership teams to strengthen those structures and processes that are really critical for successful implementation of the DDICM. So we're kind of looking at all this data together to support implementation of the model. And then thinking back to the theory of change, right? We anticipate that those coaching practices will result in enhanced teacher practices and high fidelity intervention implementation. So we'll take a look at that now. So the process for capturing those data, I touched on this a little bit before, but coaches and interventionists are using fidelity checklists in ReadyCoach to log fidelity. Log fidelity generates intervention statistics for a single intervention, really based on teaching a specific skill, and then common research-based instructional components. And these are common components. They're these elements of effective instruction that should be present in any intervention, regardless of the skill that's being addressed. So each discrete step in a fidelity checklist is sort of tagged in the back end to these common research-based components. And we have found that for school-based coaches, acting on these common research-based components has been really helpful for informing their coaching needs, because they're able to focus on these high leverage instructional components that should be implemented across all interventions, regardless of the skill that's being taught. We analyzed fidelity of these common research-based instructional components for the 22-23 school year. We were pleased that, you can see looking across all of these, there was a high level of fidelity for each common component, as well as overall across all interventions. Now, I know I'm kind of giving a lot of data right now. So again, if you have any questions, just put it in that the Padlet, and we'll do our best to answer those. But while coaching and intervention fidelity data, they're indicating a high level of adherence to the DDICM, we're also collecting social validity data to help determine how useful and aligned the model is within the local school context. So we have a social validity survey. It consists of 17 items that are rated on a 5-point scale, 5 equaling strongly agree, 1 equaling strongly disagree. And we also have 6 open-ended questions that we are sort of using to capture some more qualitative data. So the responses from our 23-24 survey that was administered at the end of that school year, we're happy to see there's a high level of agreement on the DDICM's usefulness for addressing the needs of K-3 students. So 95% agree or strongly agree. 92% strongly agree that the DDICM is useful for improving database decision-making. And we're also seeing a high level of agreement with its alignment with the local personnel's job responsibilities. And we know that that's important when considering how likely it is that the model is going to be sustained over time and implemented with fidelity. So, okay, let's turn our attention now to some of those more distal student outcomes. So we collect student outcomes. One way that we're collecting student outcomes is through the use of the DIBELS 8th edition Universal Screener. That is being administered by local personnel 3 times a year, the beginning, the middle, and end of the school year, to all K-3 students in the participating classrooms as part of the DDICM. Universal screening serves a unique function in MTS framework by identifying students who are showing indicators of reading risk. So students who are meeting benchmarks are considered not at risk. Those below benchmark are considered at risk. And those are the students that we're administering follow-up diagnostics, identifying skill needs, and engaging in tier 2, tier 3 intervention. For this discussion, we're going to look at 3 broad areas of reading: phonological or phonemic awareness, which is measured by phoneme segmentation fluency, or PSF; phonics and decoding, measured by nonsense word fluency, or NWF; and then reading fluency measured by oral reading fluency, or ORF. So we recently examined end of year for the 23-24 school year. We looked at end of year student early reading benchmark attainment on those 3 measures. And we looked at that based on level of DDICM implementation. So going back to that implementation map that I talked about earlier, we recorded districts' implementation, and we grouped districts into low, medium, high implementation levels. So we were looking at things like screening data that's being collected, diagnostics used to group tier 2 and tier 3 students, alignment of tier 2, tier 3 to research based and target skills, and then how student progress and fidelity are being used to inform intervention decisions. So when we looked at that data, we found that high implementation districts, so those are the districts here that are represented in that green bar, that those high implementing districts had the largest percentage of students meeting benchmarks on these measures of phonemic awareness, phonics and decoding, and oral reading fluency, with the lowest proportion of students meeting benchmarks in those low implementation schools represented here by the blue bar. Now, we discussed earlier that when we're looking at these data, obviously we're looking at these data through a lot of different lenses, but when we think about implementation, we're routinely engaging with leadership teams to maintain either high implementation or engage in action planning to increase implementation for low implementing districts. And then finally, we looked at specific predictors of student outcomes. And so I'm going to turn the rest of the presentation over to Todd now.
Hi there. So one of the other things we collected data on, through ReadyCoach, we're able to collect a lot of useful information in terms of the implementation practices for educators that receive coaching. And so we were interested in the extent to which some of those implemented practices were predictive of student outcomes. So we looked at these various areas of coached practices. The first area was concerned with data use. So of those that received coaching in the use of data, we were interested in the extent to which using diagnostic data was predictive of better student outcomes, more regularly collecting progress monitoring data or fidelity data, whether that was predictive of better student outcomes. And then we were also interested with respect to those coach practices around intervention implementation, the degree to which things like providing a number of unique interventions as part of an intervention package, was that predictive of student outcomes? And then implementing specific research-based practices like explicit skills instruction, modeling, providing guided practice, performance feedback, opportunities for independent practice, the degree to which those particular coach practices were predictive of student outcomes. So we conducted a series of multiple regression analysis to look at the extent to which are these coach practices leading to better student outcomes. Found, and I'll let you advance, is that with respect to coached practices in the use of data, we found that greater use of diagnostic data among those who receive coaching was associated with better end-of-year performance on the DIBELS-8 measure in the areas of letter naming fluency, phonics, as well as word reading fluency. And so those indicators on the DIBELS-8 end-of-year assessment, we found that greater use of diagnostic data was predictive of those better outcomes for kids. Likewise, better collection of progress monitoring data, so collecting more frequent and more regular use of progress monitoring data was associated with greater oral reading fluency performance among students. And then with respect to coach practices around intervention implementation, we found that providing a number of unique interventions, so greater use of a number of unique interventions was associated with better student performance on tasks around letter naming fluency, phonics, word reading fluency, and oral reading fluency. We found that greater use of explicit skills instruction, targeting explicit skills provided in a sequenced, deliberate manner, that was associated with greater student performance in letter naming fluency and phoneme segmentation fluency. And then finally, we found that providing greater opportunities for independent practice, that was associated with a greater student performance on word reading fluency. And so we were pleased to see that these coached practices were actually predictive of better student outcomes. So this is work that's in progress. This was a preliminary study we did with one cohort within our model demonstration project. We'll continue to expand on this as we finish off this model demonstration work. But the early indicators really indicate that a lot of those coach practices were predictive of student outcomes. So we'll end with some next steps and future directions for our work with this model demonstration project and the data-driven instructional coaching model. One of the things in our current work, as Gina shared with you, although we utilize technology to collect information to facilitate kind of data-driven decisions, we still aren't really optimizing the use of technology in terms of facilitating the coaching process itself. So within our current work, it's still required we have these protocols. We train people in the protocols. They had to then indicate their adherence to the protocols, and we gave them feedback on them. But we, in our future work, really anticipate that we'll have a lot more greater use of technology in facilitating the coaching process itself. In some ways that will be structured in a standardized ways, other ways that will be more responsive to actual practitioners' use of data or their implementation of interventions that will help then guide actual coaching protocol use among those coaches. The other area that we're interested in further exploring is the degree to which those coach practices need to be implemented and the characteristics of them that need to be in place in order to lead to meaningful change. We have done those preliminary kind of predictive analyses, but we're interested in further kind of unpacking, the degree to which, various dosages of aspects of implementation are required, or the settings in which particular practices are particularly mandatory, kind of unpacking the components and their additive benefit in terms of student outcomes. And then finally, we're interested and we're continuing to kind of refine the protocols and the supports that are offered through this model. Our next step is to engage in kind of greater transportability of the data-driven instructional coaching model. So we're in our final year of this model demonstration project. And so we really are engaging in some ongoing feedback collection through focus groups and individual kind of guided cognitive interviews to better refine the process and improve on it to lead to better student outcomes. So we wanted to take an opportunity if you had particular questions. And then I will say at the end of this presentation are also some resources too. So I don't know, actually, if you want to jump to the resources just first, Gina, maybe that would be helpful. There are, so be thinking about it if you have questions, but there are two sets of resources we wanted to share with you. The first is, it's a linked document that includes access to some of our select training modules in our coaching protocol. So if you, do you want to just click on it quickly, Gina? I don't know if you can open it up, but yeah, it's a document there. You can see for each of the protocols, there's a video link there that you can actually see some of the training in the protocols, and it goes through and unpacks the protocols that we discussed. It's not fully comprehensive, but a lot of the materials are here, so you can take a look at kind of what that looks like. That's one resource. And the other is, it's actually a website that was developed for our SPDIG work. And that website also has resources around coaching model implementation, but also more widely protocols for our New Jersey tiered systems of supports for early reading initiatives. So this has many kind of training opportunities that are available here through the training tab. There are some asynchronous training modules that are self-guided. Although we've designed this for our state, anybody can access this. You can register for the online training modules, and they're self-paced, and you can engage in those if you're interested. And then we also have a resource library that's available. It has a lot of the protocols, resources, and materials for our state SPDIG. So we thought we'd share those. So a lot of that material is intersecting with our model demo project, but then there's some unique materials for our multi-tiered system of support framework there as well. So we can go back if people had questions. I don't know, Gina, do you want, I don't see any questions yet in the in the Padlet here, but if you're interested, you could add there, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask questions, we can certainly entertain any questions people might have.
I did drop the link to the NJTS SCR website into the chat. I can also drop the link to the coaching protocol training directory, but once you get the PDF of these slides, there'll be an embedded link in there as well. But look, I don't see any questions in the chat. I'll look at the Padlet one more time and then, all right, so no questions right now. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time today. We did appreciate the opportunity to share this work with you, for your participation throughout. So Todd, Alex, anything else to say, or we could pass it back over to John?
No, other than there is also, you know, maybe you can certainly reach us through contact information. We'll make sure that, I don't know if that was directly in the slides, Gina, if we share the slides, but we can make sure that if you wanted to follow up with us about any questions, feel free to do that. We'd be happy to learn from you and what you're doing with your SPDIG work as well. We, you know, these are meaningful interactions between us, so we're happy to communicate both ways.
Yeah, the email is not in the slides, but I could put it in there in the chat, okay, before we sign off here.
Perfect. And Gina, why don't you go ahead and put that in the slide deck as well, and then you can resend me the slide deck.
Okay, I'll do that.
And that'll be helpful because I will send out this recording to the SIG Network membership and include the slide deck. So then your contact information will be available in that. Let me go ahead and echo what Aaron put in the chat, and that is thank you. Right, I really appreciate the presentation, the time that all four of you put into putting together this presentation, and of course, including the shared resources as well. So thank you, Gina, Alex, Todd, and Linda as well, who had to sign off early. So with that, I will wish you all a great afternoon and invite people to the Fidelity Friday, which will be happening tomorrow at noon Eastern. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Okay, bye-bye.